Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Ko Francesca Albanese. I'm very glad, pleased, honored, moved by many things. First of all, because you didn't run away as soon as my friend Ahmed said she's going to talk about international law. It's very good. But also because I'm very honored to be in this country. First and foremost, Maori land. I'm happy to be with you, Tengata Whenua, and anyone who lives with you. This trip comes at a very tragic time, very tragic, dark hours for the Palestinians, for the Israelis, and for humanity, because this is where I see collapsing. As of the 7th of October, although the reality before the 7th of October was already horrible enough. And indeed, this trip has been planned for many months by brothers and sisters, comrades in Australia and New Zealand. And it has been a trip that has taught me a lot, because first of all, through our Australian friends, I've learned the importance of acknowledging the custodians of the land, those who have never ceded sovereignty, and there will never be in another country where indigenous people have been suppressed and repressed without acknowledging them first and foremost. So thank you for teaching me that. It has also been a very humbling experience meeting so many First Nations and indigenous people, and the Maori friends who spend time with me and other Palestinian friends today, coming from what I'm responsible to talk about, the fate of the Palestinian people. I'm not Palestinian, I'm not Israeli, I'm just someone who speaks on the ground of law. And as Ahmed was saying, it's about human rights and justice. And it's the question of Palestine remains very much a quest for human rights, freedom and dignity, and equality. This is not supposed to be read at the expense of the Israelis or their rights, or at the expense of the Jewish people. But as an Israeli friend says, between the river and the sea, in that tormented land, it's the Palestinians who are without rights. So this is why it's so common when speaking of international law and human rights to be told, pro-Palestinian. But let's look at the facts on the ground. The 7th of October has been groundbreaking. It is something that has pushed us on what I called ground zero of humanity. There is no question that what Hamas has done by killing Israeli civilians and by taking civilian hostages is a war crime. I've condemned it from the very beginning. At the same time, what Israel has done from the very 7th of October, and then we'll talk about the before the 7th of October in a few minutes. But what Israel has done is brutal and not necessarily unprecedented, but it's unprecedented in terms of intensity, in terms of scope, and in terms of relentlessness, while everything is being really televised, despite the fact that there are no independent journalists in Gaza. Sorry, I correct. There are no international journalists in Gaza, because there are independent journalists, and 45 of them have been killed. And most of them, actually all of them, are Palestinians. And the Palestinians have become their very truth teller at the moment of incredible distress and grief. I've captured and made headlines for having said something which is absolutely true. The fact that Israel has claimed the right to defend itself, to carry out this war, which is, again, war. And have said, no, Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself under international law, which, mind you, doesn't mean that Israel doesn't have the right to protect itself. Of course it has this right. It has the right to protect itself, to protect its citizens, and frankly, also the Palestinian people who are still occupied and have been occupied for 56 years. But what self-defense means in international law is something much narrower than in the common parlance. It means the right to wage a war, which Israel doesn't have, not only because the threat doesn't emanate from another state, but because the threat emanated from the territory Israel has maintained under belligerent occupation. And so the response was to be completely different in terms of law and order. And instead, there has been now 44 days of heavy bombing, 6,000 bombs on average per week, launched on a strip of land of 360 square kilometers inhabited by 2.2 million people. And at least 12,000 have already been killed, and 5,000 of them are children. And this death toll is normal with this level of bombing in the most crowded place on earth. And I often remind people, when you think of Gaza, if you manage to move beyond what you are fed by the media, which often repeats without criticizing, without really questioning what Israeli military leaders say. But if you imagine that half of the population in Gaza is under 18. So when you hear, oh, these people have voted for Hamas, no, they have not even voted for Hamas, because they were not even born, half of them were not even born when the blockade of Gaza started, because we shall not forget, Gaza has been under an unlawful blockade for 16 years, with 5 major wars which have killed thousands of people, including 500 children, and destroyed hospitals and mosques and schools, and still the people in Gaza have survived. This time is different, because in 45 days Israel has destroyed 50% of the civilian infrastructure, flattening entire residential buildings, 40,000 homes, mosques, churches, hospitals, schools, and bakeries, and the sewage system, and the electricity system. Israel is making living conditions in Gaza impossible. Was it really, even if there were a right to defend itself, is this aligned with international law? No, because there are 3 basic principles. The principle of distinction. So a military action needs always to differentiate between civilians and military objectives, between and military personnel, combatants, between civilian objects and military objects. And if you listen to what Israeli leaders have said since the beginning, it was not a military objective. There was no military target. The target has never been to eradicate Hamas military capacity. In the beginning, we have to eradicate Hamas. How do you eradicate a political movement? How do you eradicate a political reality, which has also lived thanks to the blockade that Israel has imposed on Gaza? And also, during the words that have been used are very dangerous, and in fact denote genocidal intent. Flatten Gaza, erase Gaza, kill the animals, the human animals. No, they are not even animals. Sorry for the animals who are compared to the Palestinians. This language is awful and should have been condemned. And also, this call has been amplified in the Israeli public. And there are many Israelis who are against it. Really, they are against it and have opposed themselves, like many Jews around the world. They oppose it and they say, this is not in my name. So this is why I agree with Maher. This is not a clash of civilization. This is not a clash for religion. This is still an anachronistic settler colonial regime that pursues the acquisition of land by force, by forcibly displaced its native indigenous population. In fact, 75% of the people in Gaza are not even from Gaza, they are from modern-day Israel. But so all this destruction is pushing the people in Gaza southern and southern, while the south of Gaza is also being bombed. And no water, no medicine, no food, no essential supplies have been allowed in. This is catastrophic and this is criminal. So this is why, together with other rapporteurs, we have denounced war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possibly genocide. But it's not a textbook case of genocide. I argue that this is a new form of genocide implemented through modern means of warfare, 21st century means of warfare. And before I conclude, there are two things I wanted to share. The West Bank and East Jerusalem. We shall not forget what's happening there, where there is no Hamas military presence, and still 200 Palestinians have been killed, 50 of them are children, Palestinian prisoners, and now it's reported, there are even videos that have been released by the army, which, by the way, it's acting without restraint, and it's even circulating this information. Palestinian prisoners have been tortured, humiliated, and I'm sorry when I see these images circulated on social media, because their dignity is infringed times and times again every time these images go out. But this is why I said, while Israel has never acknowledged the Nakba, now they're calling for a second Nakba, openly. And in fact, dozens of communities in the West Bank have been forcibly displaced. Villagers are just packing and going. So what I understand, or probably I can't understand the pain for average Israelis who have been brought back to the images of the Holocaust through what they endured, because there's no question they've been persecuted for centuries in Europe, for centuries, and there's something that the trauma builds in us and gets into our DNA. But so I say, if we can empathize with the Israelis, why we can't empathize with the Palestinians? Because for them as well, what's going on is really, really bringing back not only the memories of the Nakba in 1947-49, the memory of the Nakba in 1967, because 350,000 Palestinians were displaced also amidst mass destructions in 1967. But the Nakba has never been over. The Palestinians have never come to a closure. Even here, even in this country, like in Australia or everywhere in the West, the Palestinians struggle to have their past acknowledged. They have to explain over and over their history, their past. The pattern of anti-Palestinian racism that is tangible in the West is unacceptable. And this is why I say it's upon all of us to educate ourselves and educate the others and correct the misinformation that comes from politicians or comes from our neighbors or the media. And the last thing is that I'm often asked, what's next? I don't know, I wish I had a crystal ball, and I don't. And I wish I had a magic wand to go back to the day before the 7th of October, because I had the feeling that we were on the cusp of a change, because people had started to understand what is apartheid and why. Of course, the Palestinians living under apartheid, it cannot be otherwise, because when you have military rule imposed on 4+ million people and the Palestinians under occupation, while the Jewish Israelis who live in the settlements, which are war crimes in and of themselves, under Israeli law, civil law, of course it's discrimination. This legal dualism is the backbone of apartheid. We were just about to reach that level of awareness, and all is gone. So there is a lot of effort that needs to go into finding a path for humanity, where both people are recognized with their trauma, their wounds. I don't know how it will happen, but it's necessary that the international community, including your government, plays a role in it. Doesn't matter that New Zealand is far away, still votes in the General Assembly. Why doesn't it call for a ceasefire? While your Prime Minister declares a ceasefire in his personal capacity, what is it? Why is not the government declaring it? Because to block this country. To end the slaughtering suffering of civilians, which frankly is affecting both the Palestinians but also the Israeli hostages. How to protect the hostages when bombs pour hour after hour over that desperate land? So this is why I say there are a few things that need to be done now: ceasefire, unfettered humanitarian aid, humanitarian corridors that do not translate into channels for forced displacement of the Palestinians. There shouldn't be the camping in the Sinai, mass camping in the Sinai, because this is not what the traumatized people of Gaza needs. So other solutions must be explored, including the fact many of them will not be able to live in Gaza for a few years. But this is why I'm saying they should be able to be reunited with their families in Israel, in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, or elsewhere in the world, but they should be asked what's better for them now. And as we move forward, there cannot be any way out without ending the occupation and the apartheid regime, starting with the occupied Palestinian territory. Then 2 states, 1 state will be decided by the Palestinians and the Israelis, but there is no way that the situation can continue as is, and we can go back to the status quo prior to the 7th of October without an end of the occupation. Thank you very much.